European Union leaders once again gathered for the Brussels summit, but the European Commission president had to leave for quarantine after one of her staff tested positive for COVID-19. Well, the summit is significant in many aspects, this time particularly for Brexit. But disagreements on pandemic control, Turkey, Belarus, rule of law, and other issues among EU members have highlighted existing divisions within EU. So what will happen with Brexit? What are the key issues facing the Union? And how is Europe looking to position itself in the post-pandemic world? To talk about these issues and more, I'm joined by Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department for European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies, Fraser Cameron, Director of the EU-Asia Center in Brussels, and Ian Begg, Professor at the European Institute and co-director of the Darendorf Forum of the London School of Economics and Political Science. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. Well, the discussion about EU's future relationship with the UK is probably central to the EU summit this time. A no-deal Brexit probably hangs in the balance. So can you tell us, Ian, what are the bargaining chips held by London?
Well, I think start with both sides. Both sides have a strong incentive to arrive at a deal because the prospect of no deal is going to be damaging to both in both predictable and unpredictable ways. You don't know what kind of chaos it's going to cause at an already difficult economic time. Therefore, we have to look at the positive side before we start to talk about bargaining chips. Now, where London holds some bargaining chips is that the big sticking point at the moment, rather bizarrely, is the fishing industry, even though it only accounts for something like between 0.1 and 0.2% of GDP on either side. The British, if there is no deal, would control the waters, and that would exclude some of the fishing industries from France, from Spain, from Denmark, and other countries who are keen to be able to continue fishing in British waters. So that is, to some degree, a bargaining chip. However, even President Macron has managed to turn that round by thinking if there's no deal now, Britain will have the incentive to come back in 6 months' time, at which point he can get a better deal that he can present to his fishing industry and say, look, I fought for you, I caused the chaos of no deal, and now we're getting a deal that's better than it would have been. So it's a bargaining chip with limits.
And Fraser, do you agree with Ian that probably the EU is now in a better position because patience is running out on the other side?
Well, remember, at the beginning of this, the UK said right after Brexit, Michael Gove, we have all the cards in our hand. Well, that's proven not to be the case. I think, as Ian said, fishing is ridiculously small in terms of GDP for both sides. So what we're really talking about is a level playing field, that Britain will not undercut EU companies and give them an advantage when they're trading in the single market and elsewhere. That, I think, is the #1 priority on the EU side. Also, how you actually interpret the rules that are agreed. There's a lot of mistrust now about the UK for having a minister standing up in Parliament saying they were ready to break international law. That went down very badly here in Brussels. So I think what Boris Johnson has just said is that we're not going to have a spectacular deal by Christmas. We're not going to have a Canada deal, but we might try and get an Australia deal, which is a minimum deal. And that is what they're going to try and work out over the next couple of weeks. But the cards are definitely stacked very much on the EU side.
And Hongjian, would you please weigh in on this? Which part have more political pressure to have a deal by the end of the year?
If we look at the outcome of the EU summit, we can find out that now it's a very, I would like to say, an interesting situation for this negotiation ongoing between UK and the EU. I think that now the biggest problem for both sides is the lack of mutual trust. Even we can find out, even because of the pandemic, the very bad influence, but so far not yet. I think any substantial movement forward, started from the beginning of the negotiation this year, and now even because of the fishery issue, I think it should not be a kind of a difficult issue for both sides. But of course, we understand so far the biggest difficulty for both sides related to the sovereignty, especially from UK side. But of course, I think now because of the coming of the deadline of negotiation, maybe now for both sides there are maybe a last chance to reach a deal before maybe the end of this year. But I'm wondering that for both sides it could promote the mutual trust at the end of this year.
And Ian, there is always the risk, as Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been saying, there could be a possibility of no-deal Brexit. But without an accord, that means millions of businesses and consumers will face huge costs and disruption when Britain leaves the single market. Is Boris Johnson bluffing, or is he serious about leaving the EU without a deal?
I'm pretty certain he does not want to leave the EU with no deal. And it's also important to recognize that the leaders at this point in the negotiation are speaking to multiple audiences. They want to look tough to their own electorates. That's what Macron's doing over fishing, it's what Boris Johnson's doing over threatening no deal. But they also are playing to a European audience which expects something to be solved. And that's why I'm still reasonably sanguine in expecting that a deal of some description will be done, simply because the costs of not doing a deal are so high. And on the British side in particular, although there's been a lot of effort to try to persuade businesses to prepare for no deal, business doesn't really believe this and hasn't done the preparations. So if no deal were to happen, the damage would be double. It would be the fact that there is all the restrictions that no deal would imply, but also the lack of preparation, which would damage the British economy at a time when it needs to be doing everything it can to deal with COVID.
And Fraser, are Europeans better equipped to deal with the shock? Because Macron said if conditions unmet, it's possible we won't have agreement. And also Angela Merkel said on Tuesday, European Union wants a Brexit deal with the UK, but it must be prepared that an agreement may not be reached. So they're both prepared for no deal.
Well, yes, the Commission has wrapped up its preparations. Of course, in the event of a no deal, some countries will be more affected than others. I mean, Ireland is number one in terms of the impact. Secondly, Belgium is going to be affected too because of the cross-channel trade. Then, France, the Netherlands, and so on. Other countries will be less impacted. But I mean, the position of the EU is very simple. They have a market of 450 million consumers built up over 5 decades. They don't want to put that in jeopardy, and that is their number one priority, to maintain that. And although at the moment there's a touch of good cop, bad cop between Macron and Merkel, the EU has remained united despite many efforts by the UK to split them off. And that's, I think, been shown to be a problem now for London and the final phases of the deal. But I do agree with Ian. I think both sides really want a deal because the consequences of a no deal would be simply catastrophic and worse for the UK.
Of course, this has also generated a lot of buzz on social media about whether Britain will leave the EU with or without a deal. Let's take a look at what some of them have been saying. Catherine McBride said, if Britain's Brexit deadline has been abandoned, then the EU will just keep extending. The UK is like the battered wife who is kidding herself that her husband will change. The EU will not change. It is time for the UK to just leave. Ian, are the British really positioned to accept the fact that probably they have to live with the consequences of leaving the EU with no better deal than they're already being offered?
Well, Britain has left the EU, that's the first thing to say. And we're now in what's being described as the transition period to full leaving of the EU, which will happen unambiguously on the 31st of December this year. Boris Johnson said he wanted a deal by the 15th of October. Well, as we know, that was yesterday. And he has not so far pulled everything up and thrown his toys out of the pram and said, right, that's the end of it. He's due to make a statement to the House of Commons later today, but already his foreign minister, Dominic Raab, has said, yes, we will look at how we can continue negotiating. It's an artificial deadline this week. The true deadline is at the end of December, but then you have to work backwards from that through the need for ratification through the normal due processes. So it is imminent. We need to sort something out in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
What do you make of the metaphor by Catherine? It is a divorced couple metaphor, and the battered wife still wants the husband to change, but it won't.
It's absolute nonsense. I think both sides are negotiating with the aim of getting a deal, and although one side may be less powerful than the other, I don't think the battered wife metaphor works at all in this context.
Hong Jian, do you think the relationship between Britain and EU will fundamentally change because they have left the Union?
I think in some areas, certainly there will be some huge changes. For example, now recently, very, problematic of the trade negotiation. And if we look at it recently, the UK government did a lot to push forward this negotiation with some other economies on free trade and investment with Japan, with Australia, with even Turkey. So I think that maybe for the British government, they try to change something. They want to, especially in some areas which could be controlled by the European Union. But in some other items, for example, this cooperation related to the security and also some society affairs, I don't think there will be a fundamental change, because anyway, the geography will decide something. Even there is some more, communication and exchange after the Brexit. I think it will be beneficial for the UK and for the European Union.
But Fraser, this is also a difficult time for European Union, and his Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says a lot of good work has been done, but the bloc will not do a deal at any cost. But do you think the British can exploit the divisions among EU countries in terms of a deal?
It's always been a mistake of the Brits to think that they can go and do bilateral deals in Berlin, Paris, Rome, whatever. It was always a mistake before, and it's a mistake now, because the EU want, as I said, to preserve the single market, the #1 priority here. And I think the other trade deals that were mentioned just now don't amount in total to more than 2% of the trade that the UK does with the EU. I mean, even a trade deal with America, which looks more and more distant now, particularly if Biden wins in a couple of weeks' time, would not make more than 5% of the difference between the EU's trade with the EU. So walking away from the biggest single market in the world is huge. And British business is simply not prepared for this double hit. It's a double hit of the pandemic and a double hit of being not prepared. And once unemployment starts to rise, as it is doing and will increase, particularly because of disruption to supply chains, this will be a huge political problem for the government.
Let's talk about some other agendas on the EU summit. There are disagreements over Turkey and Belarus. What kind of challenges does that pose to EU member countries in terms of security and its role in the world? Fraser?
Well, I think in terms of Belarus, the EU initially didn't look very strong because Cyprus was holding up and Greece was holding up the statement by the foreign ministers about sanctions. So it took another 2-3 weeks to resolve. Now they've come out with a pretty firm statement both on Belarus and on Russia in terms of the sanctions on leading Russian officials because of the Navalny poisoning here. Turkey is a difficult issue because it involves basically 2 member states, Cyprus and Greece, but also Turkey is such an important neighbour in terms of not just economics, but also societal issues, hosting so many migrants. And the EU has given Turkey a lot of money, but equally they're slightly scared that Erdogan might open the gates again to allow more migrants to come to Europe. So it's a very delicate balance that has to be judged by the EU just now in terms of Turkey and Greece.
Hong Jian, do you think European leaders have evolved in terms of their thinking about Turkey and Belarus and Russia policies?
Certainly, I think according to this procedure or this diversified interests of the member states of the European Union, always at the first stage, there are not any consensus on this issue, especially for the foreign policy. If we look at this, some member states, they paid more concerns on Belarus and the Turkey issue, some other not. So we can find that always is a natural process. But now the question is, once there are some maybe more and more concern from a major member states, especially from those bigger member states, for example, Germany and France, there will be some change. There will be some consensus for most of, as we know, the member states. If we look at this summit regarding to the Turkey issue, at the beginning it was not the agenda for the summit, but even if there is not the proposal from the Greek government, there will not be any discussion about the Turkey issue. But now it's on the agenda, and of course now the Germany is likely to change its attitude towards this sanction issue against Turkey. So we can look at maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks, once there are more tensions between especially Turkey and Greece, perhaps there will be some more possibility for European Union to find out the common stand on this issue.
And Ian, about the integrity of the EU itself, because the integration of EU has faced some challenges. When COVID happened, there was no coordination between EU member countries in terms of border control, epidemic control, and social assistance. Do you think European Union leaders should reflect on those issues and what kind of solutions they might come up with?
Well, let me say a quick word first on Turkey and Russia,
Yep.
because there's one common element in both cases, which is new sources of energy. The reason there's so much friction between Greece, Cyprus and Turkey at the moment is the discovery of gas deposits in the eastern Mediterranean. Turkey wants to claim it, Cyprus wants to claim it, and they can't both have it on the same terms. In Germany, there's a project to bring gas directly from Russia through a second pipeline called Nord Stream 2, and there's a lot of motivation in Germany to stop that because of the Navalny case. Now, on the collaboration between countries, I think at the beginning it was very much an element of each country to its own,
Yep.
but you did see signs of solidarity from countries like Germany helping Italy, which was the first to have a severe COVID outbreak. And more importantly, there was a major agreement in July, to have a massive recovery program funded at the European level in addition to all the national recovery programs. And that breaks new ground. It's the first time such a massive intervention has been agreed at European level. It was difficult, but it was agreed. And this says to me that there is a coming together at European level on how to deal with the economic consequences of COVID, even if some of the initial responses on the health crisis were a bit too disjointed.
And Fraser, you agree that Europeans actually corrected some of their earlier mistakes and come together in better shape and form this time?
Yes, I do. There's a saying in Brussels, never lose the opportunity to develop from a crisis, and this is what the EU has done. It was a bad start after March, April in the EU with countries going the wrong way, but then I think the Commission began to take charge and put forward a remarkable budget proposal. First time that this has been done, as Ian said. And now this is being pushed through at a record speed and shows the level of EU solidarity. The Parliament has still got to approve it. They're making one or two noises, wanting little adjustments here and there, but I think it will be passed at the next plenary, and then we can move on to actually disperse the funding. So I think it's actually a crisis which has shown the EU is capable of delivering and moving forward and deepening integration.
But the COVID crisis is not over. Actually, its president, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, have to leave the summit because a member of her staff tested positive for COVID-19. And there is also the question of how should we pay for the recovery program? Who should do the work? Who should enjoy more benefits from whom? Do you think European countries have a clear, better plan this time? Fraser?
Yes, they do. I mean, they have come up with essentially a key in terms of how the money will be funded through the budget and the additional budget, and also now discussing the priorities where it's going to go, keeping in mind the importance of the Green Deal in terms of dealing with the pandemic, in terms of dealing with trying to level up between the regions. So these are the priority areas, and there's broad agreement on that. So I think, you know, there are still one or two disputes. There's still not open borders everywhere, but I think the EU has, in terms of the enormity of the crisis, shown some maturity and also taken some very important decisions.
And Ian, I want your take on what is going to be the impact of the second wave of COVID on Britain and Europe in general.
Well, it's clear that there is a second wave across the continent. It's causing new forms of localized lockdowns, and that is going to disrupt the economic recovery. There were some who said that initially that the recovery might be, as in China, a V-shaped one. It would down sharply, then back up sharply. It now looks more likely to be a W, down, up again, and everybody's waiting with huge anticipation for the solution to this to come from a vaccine. So there is going to be a challenge on mobility in Europe. But I don't think that undermines the principle that Fraser and I have just been talking about, which is that the European Union has come together to try to deal with this, at least economically. And that breaks such new ground because it means that the EU level as a whole is borrowing to finance public expenditure. It will not start repaying it before 2028. And that means it's a massive fiscal stimulus going into the economy, which is exactly what it's going to need in trying to recover from the pandemic.
And Hong Jian, usually the conventional wisdom is that the Europeans hate stimulus programs. They are more conservative in terms of financial stimulus. But why they can agree on something so big this time? So in a sense, does COVID change the mindset of Europeans, you think?
I think, firstly, this, the pressure or this kind of, especially the lack of more economic growth, give a very, very big stimulation to this, as we know, the recovery plan. And if we look at this, some statistics, maybe perhaps this COVID-19 will give a very, very bad impact on European economy. And secondly, I think that the European Union and also some major member states, they want to do something more by taking use of this financial instrument. For example, to give some more stimulate, to give some more driving force for this so-called financial integration. As we know that it's always a difficult question for most of the member states, and to have some more financial integration. But at this time, I think the crisis itself will become a chance for most of member states to have a consensus. And the third is, as we know that before this pandemic, European Union institution has green industry and the digital industry strategy. So I think it's also an opportunity for European Union, for some major member states to push forward those industry strategies by taking use of this budget and also recovery plan. So I think finally this is some maybe a common goal, and also the change of major member states, especially Germany. I think it gives a very, very big driving force for this plan.
And there is a bigger context, of course, is China-U.S. tensions. So, Fraser, I don't know how much space China policy will cover in the EU summit, but how is the EU looking to reposition itself vis-à-vis China and the U.S.?
Well, there's going to be a special, not summit, but a meeting of the leaders, informal meeting called by Angela Merkel in Berlin next month after the US election. I think the consensus in the EU is to stick to the strategy agreed last year, which saw China regarded as both a partner, as a competitor, and a rival in some areas, this sort of tripartite attitude towards China. I think they'll also be looking at the potential for cooperation with the Biden administration, looking at whether it will change on important issues like climate change, like regional security, Iran, on trade issues, seeing whether there are possibilities for cooperation, not only between the EU and China, but between the EU, China, and the United States. So I think that's going to be important, that meeting in Berlin that Merkel's hosting in mid-November, to take stock of the possibilities for increased cooperation all round.
Well, how about the British? Do the British also looking for some kind of a strategy coordination with Europeans in terms of China policy? Ian?
I don't think the British have made up their minds yet on how to deal with some of this. But there are two words that characterize what's going on at European level, including the UK, and that is the two words strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy is economic in that the early stages of the pandemic crisis revealed excessive dependence, particularly for some medical-related supplies, on China, and supply chains coming from China.
Yeah.
Strategic autonomy also covers the relationship on security with the US, where not just Trump, but other previous US presidents have signaled a withdrawal of support for Europeans. So Europe has to act collectively to boost its autonomy, and that has to suck in the Brits somehow. We just don't know how yet.
Another big question looms large is, of course, Germany's future, because Chancellor Merkel is now entering the last year of her term in office. So, Fraser, what will become of Germany's policies post-Merkel?
Well, Germany will continue to be the most important member state, and whoever is Chancellor will be, along with Macron, one of the two most important political leaders in Europe. I mean, if you think back, Helmut Kohl, Gerhard Schröder, Angela Merkel, they've all played a huge part in European integration, simply because of the size of the German economy, its strategic position. It can't be any other way. And of course, the fundamental relationship in the EU is between Berlin and Paris. So despite all the ups and downs, that relationship between Germany and France will continue, regardless of who takes over from Merkel.
But you don't think the German politics is moving right, so it will probably turn more inward after Merkel?
No, the main candidates are rather similar to Merkel. In fact, I would put my money on Armin Laschet, who's the premier of North Rhine-Westphalia, the biggest German state. He's very similar to Merkel in outlook. There's a broad consensus in German politics in terms of how Germany should position itself both within Europe, support for European integration goes across all parties, and to play a wider role in the world. And it's to what extent Germany now uses its position to play that wider international role that will be important, not only for, I think, Europe, but for China and the United States.
All right. Thank you very much. We're running out of time. Thank you, Fraser. Thank you, Ian. And thank you, Hong Jian. And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.